Welcome to the Meria Heller Show, on the net since 2000 and still going strong. If you feel like you're not getting the real news, if you feel like you're not connected spiritually, you have found your home. Meria covers a wide range of topics as only a snarky New Yorker can. Straight up, no chaser. No censorship, no corporate sponsors, thus true freedom of speech. Your subscription gives you unlimited access as a member of the smartest audience on earth. Relax and enjoy the education. Now here's Meria.
Good morning, world. Meria here, alive and kicking. Welcome to the show. Today I have a special guest back on the show. It's been a while, David Icke. If you're not familiar with David's work, get over to davidicke.com. And I'm really happy to have David on the show with me. Good morning, David.
Hello, Meria.
How are you doing?
I'm good, actually. Yeah, it's a very interesting time, to say the least.
Absolutely. You know, last week I watched your video on coronavirus, and you know, there's so much obfuscation around this that it's hard to even pinpoint it at this point. So I was, very interested to hear what you had to say, and I also would like you to tell me, what's going on in the UK with the coronavirus. Has it affected anybody in the town you live in?
Not that I know of, no, but we've had the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, this week laying out a, quote, battle plan in view of various scenarios, which include troops in the streets and all the other things that you would expect the state to exploit in the face of something like this virus. And, you can see it as an outbreak of a disease, and it's spreading around the world. Or you can put it into a much greater context, and it's context that's always missing. Things are presented as dots and not as pictures, patterns. Mm-hmm. And, there's two great things that I work with all the time. One is a very, very old saying that goes back to Rome, I think, ancient Rome, which is he who most benefits from a crime is the one most likely to have committed it. So I always ask the question when anything like this happens, who benefits? And the other thing is a phrase that I've used in the books a number of times, and that's know the outcome and you'll see the journey. In other words, if you know what the plan is, the planned outcome is, then suddenly daily events are no longer random. They're not happening here and there and what's this about and all this has happened now. Once you know what the outcome is planned to be, then you can see the stepping stones daily towards that outcome. You realize that these things are not random, not the society-changing things anyway. Mm. And so when you apply those two things to the outbreak of the coronavirus, you are left with who benefits? Well, anyone who wants to justify the imposition around the world of an Orwellian lockdown state, a tyrannical state, benefits from the coronavirus. And they benefit in two ways. One, because they have the excuse to do that, to say we have to do this, we have to do the other to protect the public. Mm-hmm. And on the other, you have this innate, not in everybody, but in vast numbers of people, this innate fear of death and fear of the unknown, and they're, of course, both aspects of each other. And therefore, you not only have an excuse to impose very extreme draconian measures, you will also have great numbers of the public in fear of not surviving. This is the psychological mechanism that kicks in when these things happen, who are going to support the governments in imposing the draconian measures. And when they come out with a vaccine, I've said since this started, I will be absolutely staggered if that vaccine doesn't already exist and they're just hanging about waiting for people to get frightened enough for the mad rush to get the vaccine. When the vaccine comes out, there are chances if it gets extreme that they will say compulsory vaccination. But even if they don't, there's going to be pressure from the panicking members of the public to have, if not forced vaccinations to protect me, then at least enormous blocks on what non-vaccinated people can do. I've just been reading an article in the last few days by two academics from Arizona, funnily enough, where you are, who are talking about should non-vaccinated people be allowed to fly. This is not just in relation to the coronavirus, but in relation to vaccination. And so you have this twin situation where you have the excuse to impose draconian measures, and you also have tremendous public support to introduce them, and we're seeing that around the world. And then on the other side, you have know the outcome and you'll see the journey. The outcome, as I've been talking about for so long, that this global cult, that's what it is, once is a global Orwellian state with a police, military, mafia, Stasi running the show, and a tiny few people at the center, not even elected, to impose their will on everyone else via this police military state. And so when you then look again at the potential for moving that forward in big leaps that this virus offers them, again, you tick another box. Who benefits? The same people that want this global Orwellian state, and through which this virus gives them the opportunity to push it on in very significant leaps.
Right.
Then you take that looking at it from that angle, and then you say, well, hold on, is there any evidence that this virus did not come out of somewhere naturally? And then you start looking at the coincidences. The coincidences that of all the places in all of China, Wuhan, where this virus is said to have broken out, has China's only biosafety level 4 laboratory. And bio level 4 is the highest level of containment of viruses. Which means that they are handling the most dangerous. And according to Francis Boyle, a professor of international law at the University of Illinois, a guy who drafted the U.S. Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989, he's been saying that actually in his experience, these levels of containment called biosafety level 3 and particularly 4 have no other reason for being except to develop offensive biological weapons. He also says that he's looked at papers relating to this coronavirus, and they say that it has gain of function. And gain of function, he says, means that it has been genetically engineered to be more potent than it would otherwise be. So that's a coincidence. Then we had, just before this virus broke out, we had a 10,000 military people from all over the world, literally all over the world, big team from America, going to China for the World Military Games sporting event. And of course, where was that held? It was held in Wuhan. And at the very same time that those games were going on, which of course is a wonderful front uncover, if you wanted to get something in there, we had a simulation going on, run by the World Economic Forum, this 1% fest that meets in Davos every year, the same World Economic Forum that gave the platform to promote Greta Thunberg, to promote the climate change hoax, which is providing the excuses again for centralization of power and dictatorship over the fine detail of people's lives. And the World Economic Forum had this simulation of responding to a coronavirus. And the World Economic Forum, the 1%, did this in league with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And if you look at the funding process and the funding history of that foundation, it funds every aspect you can think of the this cult agenda for the world. And one of its prime targets and focuses is it wants to vaccinate the world. So we have that also as a quote coincidence.
Right.
And you can see clips of this simulation on the internet where they were discussing how they would have to protect the official version of the coronavirus story, the outbreak story, by censoring, quote, anti-vaxxers, and by censoring other forms of information. And what we've had this very week is Facebook, which is owned by this cult, just like all these other major, like Google, all of them. We've had Zuckerberg coming out and saying they're going to give free advertisements to the World Health Organization to put the official version, and they're going to censor people on Facebook that are saying other things and coming out with, quote, conspiracy theories, the usual nonsense. We've also had, back in 2010, we had the Rockefeller Foundation, on which was based the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Also running a scenario in one of its documents relating to the breakout of a virus and what would happen and how the people would respond, and it's just a mirror of what's happening now. And then, you know, when I did that video, my son Gareth talked to me about this stuff, and it went on YouTube. About an hour, it couldn't have been more than an hour or so after we did it, I saw the story that Israel scientists are at the forefront of coming up with a vaccine for coronavirus, this strain of coronavirus, quote, within 90 days, according to the government, and that for human use, and that was last Friday.
Right.
And so how did they do that?
I don't know.
What they said was
right.
that they were testing some technology, and they chose the coronavirus to test the technology. And as one of the scientists say, it was just pure luck. I don't think so.
I don't know.
And I think this vaccine has been waiting for this all along.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. You know, when you go back to Wuhan, it was my understanding that at the same time, Wuhan went totally 5G. Do you think that had something to do with it?
Well, in terms of 5G, I mean, what I'm saying is you can't come out at this moment, I don't think you can anyway, and say this is what happened, this is exactly what happened, this is exactly what happened. Right. We may be able to get to that point eventually, but what you can do is look at all the possibilities and all the coincidences which start to lead you in a particular direction. And 5G is certainly something that has to go in the mix. You know, this is why if you keep from people the nature of reality and the nature of the human body, if you like, then you can do things and people will never say, okay, I can see the cause and effect here, because they don't realize there's cause and effect. And we have a body which appears to be solid and physical, but actually its base form is a wave field information field, an electromagnetic field or fields on one level. And so what we see as the physical body is actually a hologram. As this whole reality is holographic, and it's a hologram that is a projection of this information blueprint, this wave field information blueprint. And it's exactly the same principle as the holograms that you see in the shops, and they're becoming more and more sophisticated now as they're making them and putting holographic people in with real people and stuff like that. Because how do they work? What happens is that there is a waveform print, which is flat, and then a laser is fired at this waveform print, which is a waveform version of whatever's being photographed. And suddenly a three-dimensional image appears miraculously out of this waveform print, what they call an interference pattern in holographics. And suddenly you have, and the best of them seem very solid three-dimensional versions of whatever's been holographically photographed. And so you look at the hologram in that sense, and what it is a projection of the wave field, the information field. So what is happening in the information field must happen in the hologram, because the hologram is just a projection of that information.
Right.
They can't be different, because it's like, something leaving the projector at the back of the theater can't hit the screen in a different form that it left the projector. They're one and the same. They're different versions of the same thing.
Right.
So what I'm saying is, when I'm leading round back to 5G, and indeed this electromagnetic soup that we live in general, is that the body is a reflection of its waveform field. As long as that is in balance, the body will be healthy, because it's a projection of that information. So if we look at these technological waves, that's what they are, that are coming off this technology, and certainly in a more powerful way in 5G, they are impacting upon the wave field blueprint of the body, which then, if and it does, it destabilizes, disharmonizes that field. That will play out in the holographic, what we call the human body as we know it, as a flaw of some kind that it reflects the nature of the flaw in the information blueprint. Something else that we need to appreciate is that everything in our reality is a frequency. Mm-hmm. Every thought, every emotion is a frequency. You go into a room where there's been an argument or something, and what do we say? You could cut the atmosphere with a knife. Well, what is atmosphere?
Right.
It's frequencies given off that reflect the emotion and the thought patterns of people in the room that have impacted upon that field. So everything is a frequency, and everything includes diseases. Right. This coronavirus strain will be a particular frequency. And so it too has a frequency level, we call a wave field level, and it has a holographic level, which people will see under the microscope. But they're expressions of the same thing. And what I'm saying is, I'm not saying this happened, I'm saying it's possible to put in the mix that these viruses can now be broadcast in terms of technological frequencies. They can attach to the wave field of people, and they can infuse that disease, that virus, into the wave field, which will then become expressed in the hologram, and will say, I've got the coronavirus. Another thing, of course, is that the immune system is part of this wave field information blueprint. This is why vaccines are so damaging, because they are very distorted wave fields because of the toxic nature of them. And they impact on the wave field level in a very detrimental way. But these 5Gs and these other forms of electromagnetic technological frequencies can disturb the waveform blueprint of the body to impact upon the immune system and weaken it. This is why people who work with certain electromagnetic technologies tend to get cancers, for instance, or psychological problems that are on a much greater ratio than the general population. This is why people get ill when they live near power lines or live near the phone towers, etc. It's because of the impact of those technological frequencies upon the body field, which becomes expressed in the hologram as what we call, quote, physical illness. So all these things are possible. Right. And we've got a situation where the technological cutting edge is never what we see in the public arena. It's always light years in the secret bases and the inside mountains facilities. It's always light years ahead there than anything we see in the mainstream arena. And so they can use stuff that people will just wave away, oh, that's impossible. Right. Well, no, it's not impossible. It's just that you've never been allowed to see it, right, which is a very different thing.
Well, here's a question I have for you. It's two parts. Number one of my first thoughts when this started happening was this could be Agenda 21 because we're time-wise at that point. And the other thing is, could the chemtrails, because they say a lot of people who didn't travel, who didn't fit the criteria, ended up getting coronavirus. And I thought to myself, well, what perfect way to spread it around the world than through the chemtrails, which most people ignore.
Well, yeah, chemtrails are a magnificently effective way of doing that, because, I mean, you're pouring this stuff into the lower atmosphere, and then, of course, it's just slowly but surely dropping to Earth, where it can be breathed in and what have you. And people need to, if they're going to understand the world, need to appreciate the level of psychopathy we're talking about. The psychopathy and the psychopaths behind this cult, this global cult, would make a normal psychopath seem like Mary Poppins. And we're dealing with very clever people in the way that they manipulate human psychology, but deeply, deeply sick people who have no limits of the horrors that they will pursue. So that, all these things become possible. And I must say, I don't know whether you thought of this, Meria, but what I'm always doing daily is I'm scanning everything for patterns, and I'm scanning things for coincidence, because it's usually not coincidence, but just appears to be on the surface. And I do find it, shall we say, coincidental that with this kind of big focus, not least during the Trump administration, thanks to Israel that own him, on Iran, that, we've not just had, very soon after the thing started to come out of China, we had not only Iranian people in Iran affected, but significat members of the government.
Right.
Of the Iranian regime. Now,
almost like a designer.
What are the chances of that? Those of all people.
Right. I looked at it myself and I said, this almost looks like a designer disease, to hit specific people.
Yeah, and the thing is that, everyone's focused, understandable because of the mainstream narrative, everyone is focused on China and Wuhan. And, it's come out of China, and it's, well, hold on a minute, we're dealing with psychopaths here. So, and let's not forget that China is a 100% owned regime by the cult. The cult is incubating its global structure of tyranny that it wants in China. I've been saying for years, if you want to see what they plan for the West tomorrow, look at China today. So China is 100% owned. And people say, well, why would they do this to Chinese people? Well, hold on a minute. Have you seen what the Chinese regime does to Chinese people every day? It's horrific. They don't care about Chinese people any more than people in Silicon Valley or Washington care about Americans. They are pursuing the agenda of this cult, which has no borders and has no race. Therefore, its agenda is all that matters. So that's what we're talking about. But you look at China, and it's like, has it come out of China? And have you been to China? Have you met a Chinese person? Well, who says that it's not being released in other parts of the world?
Well, look at Italy. Italy got hit really bad as well.
Yeah. And so the potential for disruption is massive, and chaos is the currency of control and manipulation. Create chaos, and what is that great Freemasonic motto? Order out of chaos, which is what I call problem, reaction, solution. Create the chaos, the problem, and then offer the solution to the chaos. This is what we're seeing. So chaos is a absolutely foundation currency of this cult. It wants chaos so it can offer change out of the chaos. And so in every way you look, you're seeing how this can be used to advance the agenda, and that includes economics. One of the connections, there are endless connections if you look at them, between the human-caused climate hoax and this coronavirus in terms of solutions being put forward. And so we're having, and consequences that lead to solutions. So we're having economic upheaval now, and it's going to be a big knock-on effect. I mean, what they've been doing at the cult's behest for a long time now is that major cult-owned corporations, not least in America, but other parts of the world as well, have been transferring their production to China. Mm-hmm. So if something goes awry in China, it affects everywhere. And they have no control over China. Well, the cult does, but outside of that, they don't. The great majority, it's something like 80%, 90% of ingredients for drugs, American drugs, come from China.
Right.
Alone, never mind all the other products. So on that basis alone, there's and now it's kind of spread. There's great potential for economic upheaval, and one of the know the outcome and you'll see the journey parts of this cult plan for the world is, as I've been saying since the last one in 2008, is a massive economic upheaval, much bigger than 2008, which will allow them to introduce a whole new economic system, which I've been writing about for decades as their plan. And then you look at the last Davos conference of this 1% of the World Economic Forum that did the simulation on coronavirus. And there was Prince Charles turning up only a few weeks ago, calling for a new economic order to save the planet from climate change. And this is a theme also in many areas of this, what I call climate cult, where they are demanding a vastly new form of global economics. And this, again, is exactly what this cult wants, because it is behind the human-caused climate hoax, as I'm sure in some way it's behind this coronavirus.
Right. Well, David, we need to take a short break, so stay with us. David and I will be right back.
We must be in the Twilight Zone or some other dimension, because this is March Madness Special with Meria Heller. She's slashing her prices 50% off for March Madness, not the other March Madness. This is her March Madness. 50% off for a half-hour session. Her readings are extraordinary, specific. She'll let you know what's going on in 2020 for you and where are the areas you need to shift. And when you take this advice, which believe me, it's worth much more than the discount that you're getting, it's a gift. And you'll know exactly what you need to do specifically in order to have the life that you want and you deserve. Peace, joy, harmony, and financial prosperity, and all those things that when we're aligned with that higher power, we get them. Meria knows exactly what you need to do because she's so clear in her vision. She'll give you the answers and she'll record your sessions so you can take notes when you listen to it. She's amazing. She's my favorite intuitive, and I get my reading once a year with her as well. So take advantage of her 50% off special. The special is on her website. Just go to the button that says donation and you can click there for it. It's $100. I mean, that is an incredible price to pay. You deserve that. Give that to yourself. You can go out to dinner and spend that and it's gone. This is going to be there for a lifetime, and you'll know exactly what needs to be shifted in order for you to have exactly what you deserve to have. Align yourself today with the source of love, and that's where you start. She'll give you the rest of the specifics, and enjoy your session with her. She's definitely worth it. Get your March Madness. It's available for the entire month. And remember that it won't be back until next year. Okay? Have a fabulous time with her session and with her. She's the best. Bye.
Okay, welcome back to the show. I'm speaking with David Icke. We're talking about the coronavirus. We're talking about the goal of the psychopaths that's been in place forever. David, before the break, I wanted to know, I immediately thought of Agenda 21 when this coronavirus was released. Do you think it fits into that plan as well? That's what I'm saying. There's so many possibilities here. We have to consider all of them until we can actually figure out which one it is or if it's all of the above.
Well, it's all of the above. All these dots connect. Agenda 21, which is a United Nations agenda for the 21st century, is a blueprint for the transformation of global society in the image that this cult wants. And it's all about centralization of power globally and over the fine detail of people's lives. People like states like Oregon that are claiming ownership of rain that falls on private land. That's Agenda 21. That's the scale of central control we're talking about.
All right.
And so they are using as an excuse, or have been for years and years and years, of imposing this central control, human-caused climate change. And so here's a coincidence. You have the United Nations, which was created by this cult as a stalking horse, a Trojan horse for world government, world dictatorship, that is the vehicle for selling the climate change caused by humans hoax through its Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And the same UN is offering the solution to human-caused climate change in the form of Agenda 21. But there's another agenda which is very relevant, very, very relevant, called Agenda 2030, which is another UN operation, which is 17 goals, I recall it is, 17 goals to change human society. And these 17 goals, as always, are things that on the face of it you couldn't argue with. That's the idea. That's selling it. Oh, well, we want this world, these 17 goals. Oh, that's good. Yeah, we want them. The devil, however, is in how they propose to achieve them. Because they don't want the goals at all. They don't want the goals of no one being hungry and no one being homeless. They don't want those goals. It's ludicrous. But they want to tell you that that's what they want.
Right. So
that they can say, well, the only way we're going to bring about that is to do this, which is centralization of power through Agenda 21, when Agenda 2030 and Agenda 21 are just different masks on the same face. And so at 2030, Agenda 2030 is very interesting. because that is the year that keeps coming up and coming up and coming up. You know, as I scan for patterns, well, one of the patterns is 2030. So you have Agenda 2030, the UN plan for global transformation and centralization of power globally. You have, if you take the last prediction of how long we have to save the planet, you know, this climate cult nonsense. We have 12 years to save the planet. Is that the 12 years to save the planet now, or was it the 12 years or 7 years that Al Gore said years ago that has long passed and we're still here? But anyway, you take that 12 years and you play it forward from when it was first mentioned, and you hit Agenda 2030, you hit the year 2030. You then look at Ray Kurzweil, the Google executive, who's the sales pitcher for Frankenstein, wanting to connect the human brain to artificial intelligence, so artificial intelligence becomes the human mind.
Right.
And he's saying that will begin in 2030, or around 2030. It will start to be moving by 2030. And then you have Prince Charles coming along to Davos, like I said a few weeks ago, and he says that this new economic order needs to be in place by 2030, and this is everywhere. You keep seeing this thing, this year, and so we're looking at 10 years from where we are now to turn this around, because by 2030 they want so many things in place that we're now seeing. Now you play that against the coronavirus, and that has the potential to push this on faster with, like I said earlier, public support through fear of not surviving.
Right. But let me ask you...
What you see
right.
and what you notice is that when something happens which appears to be like a temporary thing, oh, we've got this problem, so we have to impose draconian measures because of this problem. What happens is when the problem passes, the measures don't get rolled back. Right. They might get rolled back a bit, but they don't get rolled back anything like to where they were before the problem. So, you know, a lot of things that they will want to introduce on the back of this virus will not get rolled back when the virus is gone.
They always say it's temporary. It's just like a gas tax in America, you know. It's just 2 cents for now, but it's just temporary, which of course never turns out to be temporary. But let me ask you this. You know, we saw this before with other diseases, whether it was Ebola scare, the SARS threat, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that this particular virus is going to be bigger, or could this be the big one?
Well, I think it is going to kick on for a while. When you read the signs and you look at the political reaction, and you look at the reaction of various bodies, which I would call the usual suspects, that this is a bit different. We had Ebola, we had SARS, and it came, and we're all going to die, and then it just disappeared. But this one is being hyped, and measures are being taken that are they are an advance of that. Right. You know, we never saw this stuff going on with Ebola. Well, we had lots of talk about it, but there are things happening now that weren't introduced as a result of that. So I do think this is the big one. I mean, you know, we talked about for a long, long time that one of the cards they were going to play was a virus, a disease of some kind, because it ticks every box for them, as we've been talking about. But I do think this is going to kick on. And
I was reading an article in the news this morning where they're projecting, and they say this is a good a guess, basically saying it's a low guess, that it'll kill 15 million people. Yeah.
So they're obviously trying to terrify people. And what we absolutely must do is stay calm. It's vital. There's no positive in panicking, in not staying calm. There's every positive in staying calm. Staying calm doesn't mean you don't do anything. Stay calm means you do it calmly. Because once you panic, especially when you fall into the reptilian brain survival reaction system, the R complex, as they call it, in the back of the brain, then you stop thinking straight. And when you stop thinking straight, and emotion comes in, which is basically fear, and you don't think straight anymore. And if you don't think straight, you're going to make bad decisions, or you're going to accept draconian measures because it feeds your fear of not surviving. Oh, yeah, do anything, it doesn't matter, anything. So it's very important that we stay calm. And at the moment, anyway, put this into context. When you look at the staggering numbers of people that die in America every winter from flu, you know, in some years, bad years, it's tens of thousands. So let's just put it into some context for now. We don't know where it's going, of course, and you know, I'm not going to even try to predict it because don't know. But as things stand, let's just, keep calm.
I agree with you. First of all, the flu, they say, kills 50,000 people a year.
Yeah, and the thing is that I would say to people in America that when they're saying this number have got the virus, this number have died, just keep in mind one thing. The population of America is 325 million plus.
Right.
Just keep it into some perspective.
What's interesting is the way the media is running with this here in the States. I mean, it's on every station. It's 24 hours a day. But imagine if they did that with how many people in this country die from gun violence every year.
Yeah, and flu and heart disease, and of course, up there with heart disease and cancer in the United States in terms of causes of death is the flipping treatment based on big pharma medicine.
Exactly.
And that's only based on the death certificate saying that it was connected to big pharma treatment, i.e. a drug reaction or something caught in hospital, whatever. But of course, vast numbers of things that are caused by pharmaceutical drugs and mistakes are actually something else is written on the death certificate to hide that. So you add them in, and the number of people who die from the treatment is absolutely staggering. And yet you never see that panicking about that.
Well, listen, I've been reporting for so many years that 23 veterans a day commit suicide in this country. And that suicide is now the third cause of death for our young people.
Yeah, well, the suicide thing is tragic, and it's happening worldwide. I was looking at a story today at the massive increase in Britain in kids under 11 who are talking to a child charity about suicidal thoughts and feelings. Our kids, there's a war against our kids, and there's a war against humanity in general, and it's psychological in nature. And this whole hyping of the coronavirus is a psychological operation. That's what it is. It's a psyop.
Right.
And that doesn't mean the virus is not real. It doesn't mean that people don't die from it, but the way it's being presented is a psyop. It's a psychological operation to terrify the population. And if you terrify someone, or make people even fear, believe terror, they will look for something or someone to protect them from what they have been manipulated to fear.
Right.
Because the two things that are the currency of the cult in its psychological war are fear and what I was talking about earlier, chaos.
Right.
Chaos and fear, and the two go together.
Well,
that's what we're seeing now. And it's so important that people stay calm and look at this without getting pulled into panic, because then thinking straight goes, and then we're in a very bad space.
Right. Well, another interesting thing that I've been reading and following is, for some odd reason, this virus is affecting seniors more and children less.
Well, that's something else, you see. When I said earlier that this virus ticks every box for the cult, I mean every box. One of their agendas is to get rid of old people. And I'm coming up 68 myself in another few weeks. But of course, that's just a number to me. Age is in the mind. But old people, they want rid of them because I think what did Kissinger call people?
Useless
eaters.
All right.
Whereby once they're past the point where they can serve this cult's system and be a slave to it, be a cog in its machine, then they become, from the cult's point of view, a drain, and therefore they want rid of them. And I've quoted in my books a Rockefeller family insider called Dr. Richard Day, who spoke to pediatricians in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1969. And asked them to turn off recording equipment and not take notes, because he was going to tell them how the world was going to change, because basically what he was part of as a gopher was going to change it. And what he said that night is absolutely stunning in terms of not just theme but detail, in terms of what's happened. He described the internet in 1969, but apparently it was the 1980s before, late 1980s before basically it happened. He said, we're going to make boys and girls the same. And so loads and loads of things in great detail. He talked about the great migrations of people from one culture into Europe and into America, etc., to transform those societies. He talked about all this in 1969, that it was coming. He talked about inoculating, they were going to inoculate diseases through vaccination programs, which is interesting in the current subject. And something else he said is that they were going to introduce eventually what he called the demise pill, which is you get to a certain age and then you take a pill and you're away, you're gone. He even described in detail, because these people are deeply, deeply sick, I cannot tell you how sick and psychopathic they are. He described to these doctors how the people would have a party with their children, and they, and the kids would say, "Oh yeah, well done, Mum and Dad, you did great for us." And at the end of the party, they'd take the demise pill, and then that would be it. It was basically euthanasia. And so this is their agenda.
Right.
So this is a bonus for them that this virus is targeting old people in terms of fatalities.
Right, but then you got also
another tick in the box.
Right, then you got to look at also their depopulation agenda.
Yeah. Again, see, the whole depopulation agenda, which, because we've been writing and talking about for a long time, is connected to artificial intelligence in many, many ways. So up to this point, the population has been required to run the system. What they want is AI now to run the system. Mm-hmm. And as AI runs the system, what is happening and what is going to happen, the way things are, in phenomenal numbers, artificial intelligence is taking over jobs done by humans.
Right.
More and more and more and more and more. I mean, even news items are being written by AI now.
Right.
And so they don't need so many people to run the system when AI is doing it. So the depopulation agenda is connected to that. But the point is that there are coming up 8 billion people who are being targeted by this tiny, tiny group by comparison. And so we have the power to change this. But we only have the power to do it if, A, we get informed about what's happening and how we're being played like a stringed instrument, but also that we put down all the fault lines that divide us, because the most important thing that a few have to do to control the many is divide and rule the many.
Right.
And so we have, this whole new woke, as I call it, woke agenda, is incredibly divisive. And so what they've done in America, they've brought in Trump as a character to focus hatred on, a divisive character, and that's had a massive effect on what they call the left. It's not really the left. It's a tyranny which has hijacked the traditional, genuine left, called woke. And now you've got these massive divisions in American society because of this, because it's a psychological game they're playing. Right. Then you have the divisions of race and the divisions of gender and all these things.
How about the division of age, where now everything is okay boomer?
Yeah, but that's another thing, you see. It's very true, the saying, that there's no fool like an old fool. Because if you've lived a long time and learned nothing, then that ain't very clever.
Right.
But the point is that lots of people do live a long time and gather enormous knowledge and experience and intelligence as a result of that. And so what they're now trying to do, and they're doing this with this Greta Thunberg and this climate cult, is they want to divide and are dividing old from young. They want to create these divisions between old and young because they want the young to be supportive of getting rid of the old people in many and various ways. That's where it's leading.
But don't you find
also, they don't want young people having access to the experience of older people. See, a lot of older people can see through the climate change hoax. They can see through many things because, I've been there, done that, got the T-shirt. They don't want young people listening to them. They want them marginalised. So in Britain, when we had Brexit, there was a tremendous wedge that was thrown between young and old, where the young wanted to stay in the European Union, and older people that had the experience of seeing Britain before we went in were saying, no, it's been a terrible thing. So this divide and rule is crucial for the few controlling the many, and we need to put them aside and realize that I don't care if you're woke, I don't care if you're a Trump supporter, I don't care if you're black, white, or sky blue, bloody pink, this cult has you in its gun sights, and we can be divided into allowing that to prevail, or we can be united and put an end to it. It's just a choice, and we need to make it now.
Absolutely. Well, David, thank you so much for joining me. And by the way, before I leave, I just wanted to ask you what you just said about the young and the old. What do you think about the young people in this country, in America, where they are the majority, facing two men 78 years old as president?
Yeah, well, that's the way the system works, eventually that will be overturned, I guess. But this is the way the system works. You want certain things to happen in terms of divide and rule, but at the same time you want some things to stay the same because it suits you.
Right.
This cult doesn't have to be consistent. It just has to reach its end, and it does that, actually, funnily enough, by inconsistency, which is why there are so many contradictions between what it says and what it does.
All right. Well, David, thank you so much for joining me today, and I guess we'll talk again soon. Thanks so much.
Been a pleasure, Meria. See you soon. Bye.
Bye. David Icke. If you're not familiar with his work, get over to davidicke.com. And listen, like he said, it's the same old thing I've been saying. It's obfuscation. There's so many angles of looking at this. But I do agree that there is no point in getting yourself all in a tither and getting terrorized over this because, as a wise man once said to me once, it is what it is. So stay alert, stay aware, and stay calm. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting the show.
Thank you for listening and supporting The Meria Show. Tell others what you learned today. Knowledge becomes wisdom only when it's shared. Encourage others to subscribe today. www.meria.net. Often imitated, never duplicated. A world of information all in one place. www.meria.net. Always ahead of the curve. always on your side. Get active or get radioactive. Subscribe today.